Hola, you are listening to First Gen Healing, a podcast on Latinx healing and awakening journeys. My name is Priscila Luna. I am your host, and I usually say, Mujer, let us into your world, but I am so excited because today we have our first Latino on the podcast, so I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm definitely super excited to be your first male guest on the podcast. My name is Michael
Yay!
Lemus, and I'm the founder and CEO of Reclaiming Your Happiness with Lemus LLC. Thanks for having me.
Woo! What I'd like to start in the podcast is for you to give us a little bit of background on you, where you're from, your cultura.
Yeah, well, let me go ahead and start off on where I grew up and more of my cultural background. So, my parents are actually Salvadorian, and so they actually came over to the United States and specifically to California and the Los Angeles area in the 80s. And for folks that are not familiar, the reason why a lot of Salvadorians came over to the United States around that time is because of the Civil War that was going on then. And
Mm,
so it was a lot for people to be going through during that era. And it brought a lot of Salvadorians actually to the United States during that time. And so that's how my parents actually ended up coming here. They came as children. And so it was really interesting to also, grow up with parents that grew up here as children because they had a lot of that American culture engraved into them really, really quickly,
mhm.
but luckily enough also still held on to a lot of their Salvadorian culture and was able to also pass that on to me. So I grew up here in Los Angeles. I'm now in Northern California, but I've stayed in California throughout my whole life. But very fortunate to just be able to be a first generation college grad, professional. For me, culture is super important and representation is really important. And a lot of what I do really comes back to my roots. And so I know we're going to be talking about spirituality today. And so I really want to also credit my great grandmother because it's because of her specifically that why my family is also open to spirituality and open to otherworldly things is what I like to call them. My great grandma is really who I attest that to because she passed that on to my mom, and my mom passed that on to me. And we actually have curanderos in our family going back to, I think, like my great great uncle is what I've heard. Still looking into that more because I definitely want to go ahead and get a better understanding. But that spirituality has always been very much engraved. The Latino culture has been always very much engraved. And I think that's a big part of why I was also really pushed, but also supported in making sure that I sought out an education and making sure that I actually pursue something beyond what our family had actually been able to, you know, have access to in the past. And so I've been really fortunate to be able to play a role in that generational healing, and
Mhm.
also in bringing in generational wealth.
Yay! Wow. Well, first, as soon as you said you're Salvadorian and, the reason why your parents came here, it reminded me of my best friend. She's Salvadorian too. And so as she's going through her healing journey, I think that's been a part of it, recognizing that her parents came at a very difficult time and it was a little bit different than sometimes, like for example, my parents came here in the pursuit of a better life, but there was not like this emergency that they had to get out of. So I think that that's just something that maybe probably impacted the way that you grew up, right? And the way that they experienced their reality as they were assimilating, and also didn't have the time to process like the fact that they had to just rush over here
Yeah,
and come. Yeah.
absolutely. My dad, I'm glad you used the word assimilation and assimilating because that's really what my parents had to go through and being made fun of for not knowing English. And I mean, they started here in grade school. So it was already tough enough to like leave a whole country and then have to assimilate to another country's culture, but not knowing the language and being made fun of because of that as children. I mean, that comes with its own layer of trauma. But to your point, I didn't actually start hearing things about the war. And it really impacted my dad more in the sense that my mom doesn't remember as much of that time, and it also, I think, depends on kind of the region in which they were at. But my dad,
Mm-hmm.
he just like in the last couple of years started describing some of the things that he saw. It's been interesting because I didn't grow up hearing about that.
Mm.
It's up until recently where I feel like we've been having a lot more conversations about like emotional healing and spirituality and just like openness.
Yeah.
Where I also feel like he's even starting to collect his thoughts on like, oh, whoa, like that really had an impact. So I'm glad you brought that up because yeah, it's a very different story, and it's one that I'm still even getting a grasp on. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
hopeful that we can have more conversations about it as well, and that me and my dad and my mom can have more conversations about it, because that's tough. That's tough stuff. I can't even imagine. Like, I can't fathom.
Yeah. Yeah, right now you mentioned like the communication, openness that comes after a long journey, I think sometimes
Oh,
for
yes.
us. And it takes a lot to get to that point. So maybe, the podcast is on awakening and healing journeys. I'm wondering if you resonate with one or the other more, and if you can just give us a little taste of when that actually started for you.
Yeah, I like to say that my spiritual awakening began in, I think it was the spring or the summer of 2018. And so a little over 4 years ago.
Okay.
I grew up with spirituality around me. And so my great grandma, who we're really, really close to, and basically raised my mom. I grew up like listening to all sorts of things about like ghosts and spirits and curanderos and like botanicas and like all sorts of things. And so I was very aware that those things existed. I didn't have like a full understanding of it at all, but I was always around it. Like, I knew that those things existed. And my mom to this day is like super spiritual as well. So a lot of like the rituals that my great grandmother did, like burning cinnamon on Tuesdays and Fridays and like little things like that, have
Yeah.
been passed on, and there are things that I still partake in. But I didn't really have like an awakening until 2018. And it was a really interesting time because I had been living alone, and I moved up actually from LA to Northern California to pursue my career, right after grad school. So I lived in Los Angeles like my whole life until I was 23.
Okay.
I'm 31 now. And when I moved up, I had been living in this apartment, and I'd been living there for a couple of years. And I think it was like at the, I don't know, 2.5 or 3 year mark, I started hearing some really, really like creepy noises in my apartment. And it was like if things would drop in the kitchen, and then I would go check and nothing was actually on the floor. And then I was in my room in the patio, I guess kind of like patio next to my room. Um, and I would wake up to like noises, like if the AC unit was like being scratched, and like as if it sounded like if someone or something was in the patio, like actually moving around. So I
Wow.
was hella creeped out. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what the heck is happening? And at first I was like, is like someone trying to rob me? Because it really sounded like someone was in the patio. And then when I would go look, there was nothing there. Um, so anyways, I happen to come across, and I'm a really, really big, believer in just universal signs. And so I happen to come across this Instagram page right around that same time, like maybe a few days after that. And I came across this Instagram page, and they do Akashic Records readings, and that
Ooh.
type of healing. And so I'd
Mm-hmm.
never heard about it. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to try this out. I'm like curious enough, and I feel like I'm being drawn to this. So I got a reading, and the reading and what the healer told me, I mean, for one was, I mean, a whole bunch of stuff, but the big message as far as, the whole quote unquote haunting that I thought I was going through, he's like, you're not being haunted. He's like, in fact, it's actually your ancestors that are trying to contact you to let you know that it's time to actually practice your spiritual gifts. Like, these are gifts that you've had, that your family has had for a
Wow.
long time. And then I was like, oh my gosh, so that was already processing that. But then the other piece that he told me was, you're going to be the person to basically break the chains of the generational trauma that's existed in your family line. And I'm like, what? So it was a lot to
Wow.
process. And I was
Yeah.
like, how do I, like, I'm like, where do I even like begin? And he's like, if you ignore this, he's like, what you think is you being haunted is only going to get worse. He's like, that
Mm.
is not going to go away, because the calling to your true purpose is so strong that you have to focus on this. And if you don't actually connect to your spirituality, this is only going to get worse. And I was like, okay. So
Wow.
that was really the beginning, because I started to go ahead and do a lot more research into just like spiritual practices, not just what existed in my family, but like into the Akashic records. I started
Mm.
to really dig into like what hypnosis looks like, and just like crystals and a whole bunch of stuff. And so I started to just get more into the world of spirituality, and like connect back to what I think are part of my roots. And I think, if we think back to our ancestors, we have a lot of magic in our family lines. it was basically just like taken away due to, I mean, different things that exist in society. But
Yeah.
anyway, so that was my awakening. It was just like there really wasn't a choice, I felt like, to be honest. It was very much like this is your purpose. If you steer away, it's not going to go well. So I was like, all right. And that's that. I mean, I've definitely been, pursuing that since. I
Mm-hmm.
will fully admit, and maybe you resonate with this too, like there are times and phases that I go through where I don't feel as connected to my
Mm-hmm.
spiritual practices, and then I feel really guilty. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to like remind myself and zoom out and be like, hey, you're doing it again. What can we do to like come back to spirit and come back to our commitment? Because
Yeah.
there really is a commitment. But I definitely go through that, and I definitely experience guilt when I'm like, damn, like, come on.
What am I doing? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, Michael. Okay. There's like 10 directions I want to take this in.
Yeah.
I'm really right now like debating in my own head, where do I want to go, or what should we zoom into? I wanted to paint the picture a little bit more in terms of like your relationship with universe, right? Because I
Yes.
think that
Yes.
for me, to be honest, that started after my awakening.
Mm,
And I'm wondering if because there was already like this knowledge and kind of like uh,
yeah.
communication around spirit and, kind of that kind of stuff, if that was maybe not so much of a new concept to you. But, I'm just going to name all the things that I thought of and you can choose what
Yeah,
you want to
please.
talk about. The other thing is the fact that you were literally told like you're going to be the one to break generational curses in the awakening. I'm the type of person that like can jump from perspective to perspective. I don't know
Yeah.
if that makes sense, but
Yes.
I'm a thinker. So I've realized that we can, as a generation, also go through like collective trauma that could initiate the cycle again in some way without us knowing. It's been like something on my mind. And then the other thing that came up was the paranormal kind of activity that you experienced. Because I too did, and it didn't initiate my awakening. It initiated my knowledge of the spirit world, I think.
Yeah.
Um, and I have
Yeah.
a fourth thing. I'm telling you, there was like
I
the
love it.
fourth thing is the Akashic records. That's super
Yes.
interesting to me.
It's
Yeah.
definitely powerful stuff. Yeah. Well, I'm down to touch on all of them. What I can say is the third one around like paranormal activity. It did stop actually pretty much like a day or two after I started to actually start to do more digging. Because I've been, which is a whole nother maybe future episode, but I've been like legit haunted before. Like me and my family have been haunted
Mm,
like years ago when I was in high school. So I know what that feels like, and this felt different from the beginning. In the Akashic Records, I am like one step away from actually getting certified to do these freaking readings. Like I went through a program.
wow. Yeah.
And to your point, earlier, it's like sometimes it's kind of that fear of like, okay, if I take the leap, what will that fully mean? But
Mm,
I think I've arrived to this point, and this will connect back to what you mentioned around like the generational healing, or that identity. Um, I believe that it's a collective thing, especially I think in our culture, being Latino, a lot of the things that we do come from a collective framework. It's really interesting, and I think this is where I have felt the heaviness, and I don't know if you resonate with this as well, but the heaviness of kind of blending a collective culture and then individuality in terms of what
mm,
we process, right? Because for a number of us, and I'll speak for myself, like sometimes we're the first to like advocate for our needs in our entire family line of generations, right? And
yeah.
so that may be seen as like selfish, or it may be seen as like, oh, you don't understand like everything that we put in to get you here, and like that type of stuff. But I do believe I don't fully like identify as like, oh, I am the breaker of change, generational healer. I'm totally down with people that do, but for me, it's more of like I know that I'm inherently doing the work that I need to do to live the most emotionally fulfilled life for myself. Therein by impacting other people that happen to witness my experience. And I
Mm,
think that also means my family.
mm,
Um, but that doesn't mean that it's easy,
yeah.
because as I've learned to advocate for my needs and implement boundaries, like some of my own relationships, like just around me, including family, have actually gotten more distant and
Yeah.
have gotten, I would say they've gone through their rifts, and so it's not easy stuff as you start to really go ahead and pour into this. Um, but like deep down in my heart, like I know that I'm doing what's right for me.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think that it will have a positive impact on my family. It just at times feels like, dang, like this is really rough, and I wish things felt like easier. But and I'll take it back to the first point that you brought up around the universe to go
Yeah.
ahead and
Thank
close
you for
out this point.
connecting them all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yes, I have had a connection to the universe beforehand. I would say, honestly, as I've thought about it deeper, I've always felt like I've been an empathic kid.
Mm,
Part of that I feel like is due to trauma, but part of that also is like I think there's been inherent spiritual gifts like in my family.
yeah.
Um, just didn't have like verbiage for it. But in high school, that's when I started to really feel like, hey, like I think this is a thing. Like I feel like, whether something's about to happen or I see something like out on the street and I'm like, oh, I feel like that's connected to something. These days it's me seeing angel numbers all the freaking time and seeing just like triple numbers everywhere.
Yeah.
Uh, but I have had a connection beforehand, and I learned about like the law of attraction and like universal communication when I was in high school, and I took a comparative religions class. And it
Mm,
was fascinating to me just to see one, the number of similarities that exist within religions across like, the world. But a lot of them come back to your belief in some sort of like force, right? Force beyond you. So I have always felt really connected to it, but I wouldn't say it like deepened until that awakening process in 2018. Um, and now, interestingly enough, like this year, I have felt, and I even mentioned it to my therapist. I was like, I feel like I'm going through this like recommitment ceremony or like
mm,
recommitment phase
mm-hmm.
where it's connecting to like, yes, emotional fulfillment, but it's also in order for me to do that, going back to what that healer told me, emotional fulfillment in my life will always be tied to spirituality. And so when I steer away or don't pour in as much into that space, that's where I feel like, and I feel like that's the reason why I feel that guilt or shame or just not so great feeling because I'm like, wait, you're steering away from your purpose. So this is why I'm so glad that we're doing this because in a sense, this is me also continuing to pour into my like recommitment phase. So yes, thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh. I just got like a download, which is you started off by saying like commitment to yourself feels selfish. And then that
Mm,
commitment to spirituality is emotional fulfillment. But I think it's both together. Like committing to
yes,
spirituality is committing to you, which is committing to, your emotional fulfillment. So it's kind of
absolutely.
like all in one encapsulated. Wow. Yeah, I think before we started recording, you were telling me, and I was telling you that I feel like we're on the same wavelength, and I mean, I think there's just so much there. Even like the gifts part and calling it a gift, which is also a weird thing, right? Like recognizing and kind of like saying, "Oh, I have a gift." I think that can be a journey of its own because in normal society, right, or in the real
Mhm.
world this is not normal. I think we're swimming in like a different like freeway, you
Yes,
know?
it feels like that.
Yeah. And the cool thing is, I mean, at least for me, you can tell me if it's for you. I never picked up a book about spiritual awakening or anything in that sense. It's literally been my soul and the universe guiding me through every step. And yet, all the steps that I've gone through when I speak to someone who has been through an awakening has gone through the same steps. And to me, that's crazy because it's not like I was like, oh yeah, I want to be on this path. It's just kind of like I've been stumbling on it, following it, And now I'm like, wow. And everyone else who's going through it has gone through the feelings, have gone through the same motions. But I think that can lead us to the next point, which is we were kind of talking about also that we're not sure how much to share. Like I think because we're not following a guidebook or because it's not something normally talked about, maybe we don't even know how to go about sharing it. Like I was telling my friend the other day, I feel like I'm a funnel, and there's
Yes.
so much up here, but I don't know what to ground. Like I don't know what to bring down.
Yes, I feel that so strongly. So by trade, I actually work in like marketing, outreach, and communications, and like that's what I do. And so that's like more of like my quote unquote like professional career, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
I'm also like the founder and CEO of my own business and platform, and that's Reclaiming Your Happiness with Lemus LLC. And a
Yeah.
big part of like my platform is spirituality. And what I've learned in this case for me, I've taken content creation in the shared of my spiritual journey a little bit more broad, which has been a really interesting approach. Because at first I was like, I don't know if this is going to work because this is like not traditional forms of like a marketing strategy. But I
Mm.
realize that in the social media era, especially with TikTok, and I wonder if you also can relate to this, is like a lot of people want to connect to the person. And so the brand
Mm-hmm.
is you. Like I am the brand. And so for me, it's like I can share various aspects of myself. I like to still like keep it within, specific categories or buckets, as I like to call them, like spirituality being one of them, and like first generation, being another. Um, but that kind of funneling thing that you described, I've learned I'm like, when I get those quote unquote downloads, I'm like, all right, well, I feel like this is what I'm going to share today. And I'm going to talk about
Mm-hmm.
like first generation healing or like, the heaviness of what can come with that. But to your point around like that funnel and how much to share, I definitely sometimes experience challenge with like how much to share. And like, of course, through any sort of spiritual awakening, you also discover your shadow work experience, shadow
Mm-hmm.
work that you need to do, and facing a lot of like those inner demons and like facing your inner saboteur, as RuPaul calls it. And so, there's a lot of stuff that is there. And that's like really scary stuff to put out there, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that's been a bigger journey for me the last 2 years, really the last 3 years. So the reason why I even called my platform Reclaiming Your Happiness with Lemus is because when I was going through my spiritual awakening,
Mm-hmm.
it was, and I know a lot of people resonate with this when they're going through their awakening, other really big life things happen at the same
Mm.
time. And
Yeah.
so I changed jobs. Like I had an engagement that like completely broke apart and we broke up. And, I came out shortly after. Like there was so many things that happened.
Yeah.
Um, but with that, I learned, if I share my story, that in a sense, one is helping me, but it's helping other people. And I learned that in order for me to reclaim my happiness, I had to continue to commit to emotional fulfillment. And so if that meant leaving, toxic environments or pursuing different paths that were never in my plan or completely changing trajectories, that's what I needed to do. And so for me, it's been sharing more of that. And sometimes it does feel like, okay, is this random? Like,
Yeah.
is this gonna resonate? But I was like, you know what? Especially on TikTok, it's been such a game changer because I did not expect to grow so quickly on there. But honestly, the videos that have gone quote unquote viral or have been more successful have been those that one were the most authentic but
Mm.
also didn't involve so much planning on my
Yeah.
end. And so I'm just like, that's freaking wild because
Yeah.
old me, and especially again in like traditional marketing, like you're really thinking about your strategy, you're thinking about like when to post, the time, all this stuff. And I'm like, my most
And
successful videos have been like the ones that I've put the least amount of effort in, but were the most like authentic. And the word just came into my head and I was like, just share.
and it's crazy because it sometimes doesn't even matter what time it was posted, how it
No,
looked. Like,
yeah,
yeah.
so true.
Yeah, I've noticed the same, but I think like I'm in this disbelief of like, universe, is this really what it like? Does it not matter? Does it, am I really just gonna, cause when when I was like on my way to letting go of corporate and all of that stuff, I would hear like people are gonna be magnetized to your true authentic self. And
Yeah.
that's all you should care about. And I was like, yeah, but the strategy, yeah, but the whatever, and no, you're right. I mean, the videos that have gotten most traction for me are days where I wouldn't even say like I'm ready the way that I would have wanted
Yes,
to
yes.
be, or the lighting kind of sucks, or I
Yep.
just pulled up the phone.
But I think it goes back to, authenticity.
Yeah.
And you asked a really good question, like universe, is it really going to be, this easy? Like, can it be this
Yeah.
easy?
Yeah.
And I've learned that when I've been looking into abundance more, I actually was looking at a reading. I'm a Scorpio sun, and I was looking at a day. And it was talking about this. It's like the belief in abundance and that you're like worthy of essentially like having abundance come to you easily. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's hard too, right? Because I feel like culturally speaking, this is where I feel I have not resonated as much with traditional spirituality or spiritual healers. And what I mean by traditional, I'll put it in quotes because when I think of traditional healers, I think of like folks that have been, our ancestors and curanderos.
Mm.
What this kind of, and I don't know if it's new age or what you would categorize it at, but one of the reasons why I even also decided to be more present and loud in these spaces is because of the lack of representation, because what spirituality, a lot of it has become, is a lot of middle-aged white women. And that's no shade to the middle-aged white women in the arena, but a lot of the practices and a lot of the things that have become trendy are also acts of gentrification
Mm.
and are also acts of just making light or making things cool that are like part of actual ancestral practices.
Mm.
Um, and so for me, it's also been like, hey, I need to show up. I'm in no way a perfect person and I don't understand all the things either, but the representation of having Latinos be part of this conversation and to really come up as folks that are also first generation, like the intersectionality of identities for me, like I've professionally lived out a very traditional form of career, like go to college, you do all these things, but also really fast. You know, by the age of 23, I had like my master's degree, and at 27, I was already gonna enter a doctoral program, and like it was such a prescribed thing. And part of my spiritual awakening was also, I mentioned, like changing trajectories. I left my career after like 7+ years. I thought like that's what I was gonna do. I, rescinded my acceptance, I guess you can think about it, for the
Mm.
doctoral program. And so those are massive changes. But I knew then, like deep down, and the like really queasy feeling that I was feeling when I was almost going to start the doctoral program was also the nudge for me to be like, it's not your time right now. Like this will always be here if you want to come back to it. But you're going in another direction. And that other direction for me was doing stuff like this. It's talking about spirituality. And to be honest, when I first started talking about it, to your point, I kind of felt like misunderstood. Especially around like just the folks that I was traditionally around, because there wasn't much conversations about spirituality and like ghosts and entities and honestly, I was, in a field where burnout was really real. And so I started to connect the dots, and the dots for me were like, I gotta do something different. And it's nothing against the people that are in these systems, but it's just no longer working for me. And
Yeah.
I gotta do something about
Okay, Michael.
it.
We're gonna have to have another episode. I'm like, there's no way I'm gonna fit everything that we could talk about in an hour,
No
but
worries. Part two at some point in the
yeah,
future.
part two. Because one, I say the same thing. I was running towards the American dream. I was in a sprint. I graduated when I was 16, high school, college when I was 21. Got my dream job by the age of 24, 25, I think. And so I was in that hurry. And there's just so much that like I resonate when you're speaking, because I think like I haven't been able to, all of what you're expressing and what we're talking about right now, like bite size it into 7-second videos. You know what I mean? And
I feel that. Yes.
yeah. So I'm like,
Same.
how? Like, how do I do that? And also, there is so much I want to say. And at the same time, being an empath, which I also resonate with, I recognize that people, there's in front of my window, there's like this bird show that happens where it's thousands and thousands of birds will come and fly every single day at sunset.
Wow.
And I was watching it. And so there's birds coming from different directions. They never crash into each other, but they're all flying, right? And the way I see me posting, it's like a little snapshot of all of those birds crossing. And they're all coming from different journeys, and they're all in different phases of their lives, and they're all looking for different things. And then social media, like, puts out your video, and so it's left for anyone's interpretation, and I have no
Yeah.
control over that. You mentioned representation, which I think is really important too. Who I was listening to in my awakening was middle-aged white women, and I started to post for the same exact reason. I want other Latinos to know that I'm going through an awakening, and that if you're going through it, like we're in this together. There's a lot of us. Um But at the same time, like affirmations, I do affirmations. The
Yes.
thing is, I know affirmations are not going to solve your life. And if you're in survival mode, affirmations ain't going to do shit.
Mm, mm,
Right? And so I know that, but I also know affirmations served me in my
yeah,
journey, and they had a purpose and they had a space. So, in that debate of like, what do I say, what don't say, I post less, to be honest. It's been hard. It's been hard because I am an empath, and I do recognize there are a lot of people in many different wavelengths. And so I'm trying not to cause harm or offend, like,
yes.
um, but I think I also want to get better at speaking out, because those things that those middle-aged white women said sometimes are true, and I'm living
Yeah.
it out, and I'm like, holy crap, it's happening. Like, I would hear, the universe is going to have your back when you fully go into your purpose. You just have to make the jump, though. You can't wait for it to prove to you that it's out there. You have to jump. And I was like, no, that comes from privilege. They have a backup plan, blah, 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 blah. And, I saved up money, and here I am. I quit corporate. I'm going all in. And the
Yeah.
universe has come through, like, in so many weird, different ways. And so
I
I,
love,
sorry, what did you say?
oh no, I was just saying, I love that. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I've been hesitant to share it, to be honest, because I know what I thought of when people would say that. But like, this one of the ladies that I would follow was like, you're going to get random checks, like from different things. And I was like, no, I don't have a 401k. There's nothing that would come to me. In 1 month, Michael, this past month, I've gotten a refund from a hospital. A I worked for Postmates for like a split second a couple years ago. I got a lawsuit like settlement check from Postmates, like all these random things, and I'm
Wow.
like, what the hell, universe?
Wild. But
Yeah.
so true. And I'm glad that you brought up something really important because something I've talked about before. And um in fact, like in 2018, when I was going through that awakening, I presented at a conference and it was like kind of like a TED Talk style speech. And what I talked about was partly part of what I talked about with the law of attraction. And I talked
Mm,
about, yes, you can believe in the law of attraction because I do believe that, what you put out into the universe, you will get back. And like a lot of that is belief, right? Like, and I think affirmations can really play a pivotal role because it's so much of our fear, I think, is tied to our lack of worthiness. And as you were talking, it reminded me a lot of the conversations that I would have with people because, yes, there are spiritual healers out there that do have an immense amount of privilege and are, refusing to talk about that or just simply not aware. But I also do believe that there, there's some really good, techniques and things that exist out there that can actually still apply to people like us. What's been really important for me is to talk about that representation factor and to talk about that, you know, as much as people want to often take the leap or pour into themselves, if you're in survival mode or if you never grew up around money, like you have to heal your money trauma first before you're
yeah.
even able to have, those conversations. And that's where I feel like it lacks in the spiritual industry. Those conversations is where we're lacking because a lot of people only buy into, well, if I just believe in the law of attraction, the universe will just go ahead and take care of me. And I do believe, like, of course, we can take those leaps because I have taken those myself and they've paid off. But some of us like legitimately cannot afford to just be like, I'm just gonna do it and then see what happens because
Yeah.
some folks are also like having a tent to family or like just structural wise have never been able to save or like whatever that may be.
Yeah.
But it's also so beautiful when I do hear folks like us that are able to take the leap and that are able to go ahead and actually pursue their passions because oftentimes it's not what society thinks would give them success.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's part of the reason why in my business, I also decided to actually like do life coaching and business coaching and like got certified to do those things because the first year in business, like I worked with 3 cohorts of coaching clients, and I would say over 90% of them were POC and first generation. And that was incredible because I got to go ahead and work with them in helping them launch their businesses and their brands. And so many of them, I would say the majority of them talked about like, what am I going to do when I finally put myself out there? Like, are people going to resonate with this? Like, what's my family going to say? What's my partner going to say? And a lot of it was like, what are others going to say?
Mm,
And a big part of it and what I worked with them on was like, well, let's dig deeper into that. Like, where is that coming from? Because there's a worthiness factor. Do you believe that you're deserving of this abundance? Do you believe that you're deserving enough to put yourself out there? Because when that light hits, like when that turns on, that's the game changer experience because you start to like care less and less of what other people are going to think about you. And this social media like experiment that I like to call it too
yeah.
is a big tester of that because, you know, even when I first started making TikTok videos, I was like, I don't know what this algorithm likes. I don't know what it's going to pick up. Like, this is a whole new audience. Like, I don't know what these people are looking into, what they want. And ironically, I would say, especially where I'm at now, it's like, you know what? I'm going to create what I feel like is most authentic to me. I'm going to be really strategic and get purposeful and make sure that I'm able to post this content across other platforms so that it doesn't feel like a whole ass job. But I'm also going to continue to connect to my purpose and determine and tell the world that I'm worthy enough of showing up in the way that I am. And that will communicate what I needed to communicate to the universe. And we'll just work in conjunction.
Yeah.
But so much of it I hear from other content creators, especially, it's like it's kind of like this at the reverse, right? Like people are creating to see what the algorithm will pick up on. I don't feel like I'm doing
Mm,
that anymore, which
yeah.
is really interesting. I'm just like I'm creating to like one, I think in a sense it's healing me. So that's been really interesting. But I'm like, I'm just creating to tell my story. And if the algorithm picks it up, great. I tell people that are like, especially launching businesses, they're like, oh, well, I don't have thousands of followers. Like, it's not going to generate sales, or I'm not going to bring on clients. I'm like, I was able to bring in like almost $20,000 in like my first year of business with like a small following on Instagram alone because the people that ended up investing in me believed in my story and in me as a person. And it wasn't about how many followers I had. And so
Mm,
you can have 10,000 followers and still not have any clients. And so
mm,
that makes a difference too.
yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, usually I like to like zoom into people's stories. Today we've touched on a lot of things. But I think it's good and I hope people can follow and people find it interesting. I think there's also always that question to me of like I know that before this step and even if this step could be inspiring, there was so much more that had to
Oh,
happen.
yes.
And
Yes.
so I don't want to mislead anyone into thinking like this stuff isn't important. And also, some people end up in those phases for a very long time because they can't get through the things, right? I feel like as I'm working with first gens and specifically those that are going through a healing or awakening journey, I see it. I see how many mental blocks there is or how many circumstantial things that they cannot change. They can
Yeah.
change the way that they view it, the way that they approach it. But sometimes it is up to you to move to the next phase, and sometimes it's not. Like everyone has their own also timing of it all.
That's so important. I like to tell people, and I like to tell myself, healing is a non-linear journey, and
Yeah.
it's gonna come in its ebbs and flows. Um, and gosh, in this past year alone, I've gone through so many ups and downs, just like emotionally. And I think that's really important for me to like give myself the grace, and that's what I tell people often. It's like, you know, healing or whatever you're going through. I mean, it doesn't have to be all said and done by the
Mm-hmm.
specific time frame that you thought it was going to need to be all said and done.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes with healing too, I mean, that's something I've definitely realized is you may think you're done with something, and then the universe is all like, oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
So like, here
Yeah.
we go again.
Yeah.
And honestly, this past year has been a lot of that for me, but it's been affirming to be able to approach those things with the new level of awareness and healing that I have done. When I've talked to people about spiritual expansion or spirituality, or honestly, even if you take away like the word spirituality and talk about prioritizing your well-being,
Mm.
um, a lot of people experience guilt or express like, oh, my family's not going to understand, or if I do, end up changing careers, or if I decide to quit school or like whatever that may be, what are they going to think? Or if I take a break, or And so much of it, again, I just keep going back to is that worthiness factor. I think we have to ask ourselves, like, do we believe that we're deserving of A, B, and C, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes, like, the society has this feeling like, well, you should be doing this by this point, and you should have already done this by this point. Um, but I'm like, you know what? We're whole ass human beings. We're complex. We're so complicated. It's like it's just it's not it's no longer realistic because I was very much to your point, like in such a prescribed pathway to a fault for sure. But on the outside to the world, right? Like they thought I was a rock star and they're like, look at him, like he's getting all these awards and he's presenting at these national conferences. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm anxious and depressed. But people
Yeah.
didn't know.
I'm doing this because I don't think I'm worthy, right? Yeah, absolutely.
And that's I'm so glad you brought that up too, because it's like showing up in this way, because people are like, I feel like I have to be at a certain point in order to show up. And it's like, no, you don't, because this type of stuff, whether it's a podcast episode or literally just like taking that opportunity to like post 5 seconds of your content, the whole point is that like you put yourself out there. Like that's the piece. If someone resonates with it and that, turns into an opportunity, great. But it's about like getting to a point where someone as an individual just believes enough in themselves to just put themselves out there. There's so much opportunity these days, especially whether that's a podcast, poetry or graphic design or whatever that may be, to just like get out there and, express yourself. I think that's the piece where it's like the universe will always applaud us if we're being authentic to ourselves and expressing ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I think creativity is super, super important. Right now, I'm going through this phase where I'm reconnecting with why I started in the first place. Because
Mm.
I went through the phase of like, let me just share to share. And then I was
Yes.
like, then it was like, let me make this my life, and my
Yes.
business. And so then I was like, okay, well, I'm an overachiever. So let me include strategy and let me include
Preach.
structure. And now I'm back to like, no, I am literally creating a mini version of the corporate life in my own home. And that's not okay. The whole reason
Yeah.
why I left was because that was not working. So I'm like coming back to, but basically, one of the reasons that I wanted to start and one of the things that I had ideas around is like pushing first gens into creativity because I don't think that that was a priority. And so what you're saying, I think, is completely right. It's such a beautiful thing, but I think a lot of us don't even spend like a second thinking about creativity in our day to day. We're so involved in I call them like our brain treadmills, like we're just going,
Yes.
going, 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 going. And creativity was not a part of our upbringing, it was not
Nope.
modeled to us. And so we don't also include it in our own. But it literally, I think, I think it opens your mind and then it opens your world up to possibilities. Again, I think there's gonna have to be a part two.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think we could talk about in that episode is just that being an overachiever and that journey
Ooh.
of achieving, and then literally like changing our trajectory, and then going the other way of like, because I don't know for you, but for me, this journey has been everything that I wouldn't have ever done, like at some point I resigned without a backup, which was the least responsible thing I ever did and the most proud I was of myself
It be like
because
that sometimes.
yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Yes, those are the types of things you do when you're in an awakening, when you stop caring what other people
Yeah.
think, when you literally are like so invested in this feeling of there's better for me out there and it's gonna feel better. I think this journey too, as we've been talking, I've been realizing is of not instant gratification.
Oh, yes.
Every choice
Yes.
that is made in this journey is not instant gratification. Even the choice of healing, and then you do see it reflected in your family, but it doesn't happen right away. It
Nope.
takes time.
Sometimes
Yeah.
years.
Sometimes
So,
years. Yeah. Or in your career, like pivoting, like that doesn't reflect right away in the outside. It doesn't look successful to other people right away. So that's probably another thing we can talk about then. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, first off, thank you so much for having me. It reminds me continuously, which is why I'm like, okay, this is what you need to continue to do. It's always like a healing experience to be able to vocalize this stuff, right?
Mm,
And so for
yeah.
people that are going to listen to it or see it, I hope that it can also resonate with them and also inspire them to prioritize themselves. And I know that
Mm,
in Latino culture and a collective culture, right? Sometimes that may be seen as selfish.
Yeah.
And that's really hard because that's probably some of the most difficult things that I've been experiencing this past year has been like how to navigate that, right? Where it's like, I need to do this to prioritize my well-being, but I also feel like I should be doing A, B, and C, or I should be showing up in this way. And it's like, at the end of the day, like we got this one life. And sure, folks can believe in reincarnation as well, but like I got this one meat pocket that I'm in. And I was like, but you know what?
Uh-huh.
I'm like, I have to prioritize myself. That doesn't mean that like I can't support other people, right? Like that's not at all what that means, but I have to be able to pour from a full cup. And I have
Yeah.
to come at it from a place where I feel fulfilled. Otherwise, like what people are actually going to be interacting with is like a sad version of myself. And it's like, that's not what I want to be either.
Yeah.
Um, so I really appreciate what you brought up in terms of, and again, it totally makes sense because we have been on a similar wavelength. Like the what society kind of deems as successful is, and I think it's changing slowly but surely. I see a lot more people being like, you know what, I'm gonna do this. Like I'm just gonna take that leap. I'm gonna do me. But traditionally, society has been like, you gotta fit into this box. Like you have to be in that in order to be deemed successful. And then for me, I recently was like, I did like a showcase for a magazine article and they asked about success. And I was like, to me, these days, success is actually just living out an emotionally fulfilled life in which I feel at
Mm.
peace. Old me was like,
Period.
I gotta do this and I gotta get this degree by this point. I gotta get married by this point and I gotta do this, this, and this. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm just trying to live at peace. Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's where I'm at and I'm happy to be at. Doesn't come without its complexities, but I feel like I'm getting there.
Yeah. Same. Yes. Peace is the award at the end of it all. For me, it's like financial and time freedom, but that's another another talk for another
Whew.
day too. uh, but so we do have two mini sections left in the
Yes.
podcast, and before we get to them, I would like for you to maybe share where people can find you, if there's
Absolutely.
anything coming up that you'd like to share.
Well, I'm easily found. I like to joke around, but it's not a joke because I am. I'm easily found. My handle is at Arise with Lemus. So I'm on TikTok, Instagram, you name it. I'm probably on that platform. My website is reclaimingyourhappinesswithlemus.com. And what I do have actually coming up in the next couple of weeks. So part of what I did very intentionally in April 2021 is like, I need to take a pause to really focus on my healing journey. And so I did a year of business. Like I launched my business during the freaking pandemic, April of 2020. And then I did it for a year and it was really successful. And then I was like, wait, I got to do more shadow work and I got to do a lot more healing. And
Mm,
so I did. And I actually haven't taken on clients since then. And I like re-strategized my whole business model and all this stuff. And so I'm excited because actually in the next couple of weeks, I will actually be bringing on clients. And
wow.
it's a whole new set of experience and certifications. So I'm excited about that. And I'll be doing an announcement. So be on the lookout on social media when you hear this. But yeah, I'm excited. It's been a long time and I was really intentional and I'm very proud of myself because old me would have been like, just keep taking on clients, like, keep bringing on the streams of income. And I was like, you know what? You're okay financially right now. Focus on yourself. And then you're going to come back that much more powerful and be able to help people from, again, a full cup.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about that. That's going to be my next big thing and doing more things like this. So I'm excited.
Awesome. Yay. All right. So we're going to move into the resources portion.
Yes.
For anyone who resonated, now we have some resources that you guys can go check out. So the first question for you is, what is a favorite healing or mindful tool?
A big game changer for me this past year has been healing my inner child. I've been doing things like going to Target and buying myself like a Lego. I just did like this like cool little fossil set thing. But anyways, I've been buying myself things like that. I grew up too quickly, I think. And
Yeah.
so me as a 31-year-old now, I've been like just playtime, creativity. Like I had lost sight of that for a long time. And
Yeah.
so in an interesting way, I'm coming back to it.
Yeah. Every healer that I've like met up with and done some inner child healing around, the end, all like what we come to the conclusion of was, and when did Priscilla get to play? you know?
Oh.
Yeah. And so I grew up really quickly too, and I understand that. And I understand the value of those little things, like, oh, the volcano, let's make it explode,
Yes.
like those things that they sell. Yeah.
Funny enough, I was actually thinking of the volcano being the next one for me. So,
Ooh, there you go. Oh, man. All right. So, what is a habit that you do for
Mhm.
yourself every day?
So I have, and this is something I do every day. One of the few things that I like actually keep to every day. So I'll give you two.
Okay.
One is my skincare regimen. Like that's like a must. It's kind of just like starts up the day for me in like a peaceful way and in a grounding way because I'm literally having to like focus on what I'm doing. So that's one. And then the other is like spiritual hygiene. And so that's another thing where I have like four different products. Some of them are like oil sprays. And so I have like a concoction of things basically that like as I'm putting them on, there's also affirmations that I'm saying.
Mm,
So it's like a cleansing thing, but then it's also like an empowerment thing as well. And I do that every day. And both of those things happen in the morning.
love that. Beautiful. What is a song that you listen to when you need to feel inspired?
I really like this song, and since we're talking about spirituality, it's called "Yes, I'm Changing" by Tame Impala. Really great song. It's kind of a sad one, but it's about change, and
Mm,
it's about just internal change. It's definitely one that, as I was going through my awakening, was one of the songs that I was hearing at the time, crying to. But now I'm like, oh, I can actually just like drive to drive to this and be okay.
yeah. What is a favorite quote or advice that you refer back to?
That it's in the discomfort where you'll learn the most about yourself. And in the unknown, in that state of like these, I think it was like disequilibrium. It's kind of like off balance, right? Where it's like you're feeling like, what the heck am I gonna do? Or like I don't know this version of myself, but that's where so much of the learning can come from. It hasn't been me for the first like 29 years of my life. And the last 2 years have been very much like slow down. Your version of success is being you and being at peace. And that's what the priority needs to be.
Influencer that you follow that has leaves you positively inspired, or just like, yeah, someone that's positive, I guess, on their platform.
Well, I'm going to give you a shout out because you're one of the people that, interestingly enough, I think it was a couple months ago, but as my TikTok following has been growing, it's been interesting because, it's sometimes it's like videos that you wouldn't think, right, are going to be the ones that get you a lot of followers. And so I haven't really been, and this is not me like thinking I'm too cool to follow people, but I haven't really like followed many people back because sometimes it's just been like a lot all at once. And
Mm-hmm.
I just haven't looked through all the accounts. And I'm just like, so when I do come across accounts that I just feel inspired by their content, I will actually follow. And so I don't like follow tons of people, but you're one of the people that I was just like, I really enjoy your content so much so that I use your sound because I was like, yeah, like I'm gonna do this. And I come across other creators like yourself that are really putting themselves in a vulnerable position. That's what I tend to resonate towards.
Mm,
I don't vibe with what I used to vibe with anymore, which a lot of it before in the past, right? Like when it came to social media, it was like more quote unquote materialistic, and everyone has their niche. Like that's social media. Like there's a place for everyone.
yeah.
But for me, I'm like I really want to connect to people on an emotional, spiritual level, and your content has actually been one. What I appreciate about it is like one, yes, you show up vulnerably, but you talk about your journey and you're bringing other people along. And that to me is
Mm,
always inspirational. And when someone is building a community out of it, because there are so many people out there that are just doing it for themselves. And, that's nothing bad towards them. But I appreciate that you, as someone that identifies as Latina, who cares about community, wants to bring people along and like showcase them as much as it's showcasing you. Like it for you and what I've picked up from you, it really feels about like community, which I very much appreciate and it's just really inspirational.
mm. I love that. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I feel like on my end, I feel like I keep fumbling. Like, man, like I wish I could express more, say it different. And yet, the people that I have had on the podcast have told me that like I feel like they understand who I'm trying to be. Like they see it, they see the
Yeah.
vision, you know, they
Yes.
see the vision and it's so cool. I'm like, all right, even though I'm at, like on my end, it feels clunky, you know, it feels like people are resonating and are understanding where I'm coming from. And that's awesome to me. Like, yay.
Absolutely.
What is a feel good or powerful book or movie?
It's something called something daily habits. That's probably not the most descriptive right now, so I'm gonna have to look it up. But it's a spiritual book, and it
Okay.
talks about like just daily habits that you can go ahead and partake in, that can basically uplift you and your spirituality and your spiritual practice.
And then this last set of questions are the fun questions. So they're kind of
Woo.
fast.
Okay,
Salsa verde or roja?
verde.
Horchata or jamaica?
Oh gosh, horchata.
Reggaeton or hip hop?
Oh, geez. Mm, uh, I'm gonna go with hip hop, but I feel like there's become more of a blend recently, especially with Bad Bunny and all the
Yeah.
things that have been happening. But I love me some reggaeton, but I'm gonna go with hip hop.
Okay. Concha de vainilla or chocolate?
Huh. Vainilla.
All right. And then we're pulling up to a taco stand. It happens to be your favorite taco place.
Yes.
What is your taco order?
I'm gonna go with carne asada. I'm gonna go with salsa verde, and I'm going to go with it's almost like a sope really, but not the same type of
Mm.
tortilla. But I would love like some of the either cotija cheese or honestly even queso fresco on it. Like that would be my jam. And then of course all the fixins like the onions and all that.
And we need quantities. How many are you asking for?
At least three.
Okay.
So,
So well, yeah, what's your tres tacos de asada?
yes,
Okay.
asada. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Con todo, it sounds like.
Yep. All the fixins.
Okay, cool. Well, Michael, it has been such an awesome time speaking with you. And
Yes.
I am so happy that we connected. I made a call out on TikTok. I was like, where are the Latino men that are on their healing journey? And I
Yes.
think someone tagged me or you commented somehow, like we got in touch, and I'm so glad that we did.
Same
And
here. This is great.
yeah. And it's so cool to find, you know, fellow people like us that are on similar wavelengths. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Michael, is there anything that you'd like to say before we close it out?
You know, something that I've been saying a lot recently, and I'll say to the listeners, is don't be afraid to shine brightly. I think that's just been really in my mind recently. And it's just really easy for us to water ourselves down for a number of reasons, but
Yeah.
for what? Like that's what I've been asking myself. So don't be afraid to shine brightly.
Yeah. I love that. All right, guys. So if you guys enjoyed this episode, please share it with your amigas, amigos, amigues. Cuídense mucho. And remember, first gen, I love you. I love me. And I can't wait for you to love yourself.